das Podium jetzt zur Seite geräumt wird, damit Sie freien Blick auf uns haben. Sage ich vielleicht noch, Marc Beise, Süddeutsche Zeitung, Sie sehen das da oben. Als Vertreter dieser Zeitung bin ich besonders prädestiniert, hier heute diese Diskussion zu leiten, und zwar deswegen, weil wir schon in der Redaktion sehen, Herr Oettinger, Frau Merck, wie sehr dieses Thema die Gemüter erhitzt, wie unterschiedlich die Meinungen sind. Wir hatten letzten Samstag ein Pro und Contra zum Thema TTIP in der Zeitung. Da kann man sagen, okay, der Wirtschaftschef hat dafür geschrieben, der Politikchef und Rechtsstaat-Experte Quantel dagegen geschrieben, aber schon in meiner Wirtschaftsredaktion gibt es sehr unterschiedliche Auffassungen dazu und die sollen auch alle in die Zeitung kommen. Ich selbst bin, ich sage das ganz offen, immer für Handelsverhandlungen gewesen und sehe die auch nicht so kritisch wie ein Teil der Kritiker jetzt, aber ich finde, wir müssen das sehr intensiv diskutieren und ich fand das gut, dass beide Redner darauf auch hingewiesen haben, dass das ein Diskussionsprozess ist und die Staatsministerin hat ja schon Positionen vertreten, die fast schon sozusagen oppositionstauglich gewesen wären, woran man also sieht, dass das Thema wirklich viele bewegt. Ich möchte deswegen auch, dass Sie mitdiskutieren und dass insbesondere die kritischen Geister hier nachher ihre Fragen an die Runde stellen sollen und die Vertreter sozusagen des Establishments auch wirklich herausfordern, gute Antworten zu kriegen. Ich beginne aber unbedingt mit Elena Bryan, die ja schon angesprochen wurde. Elena Bryan muss deswegen jetzt zu Wort kommen, weil sie ja unsere Amerikanerin in diesem Saal ist und es wurde jetzt schon viel, sogar Kritisches über die Vereinigten Staaten gesagt und ich würde Ihnen, Elena, gerne die Möglichkeit geben, ein paar Punkte zu machen, warum die USA dieses Abkommen für wichtig halten, was sie sich davon versprechen und vielleicht auch zu den kritischen Anmerkungen, die gerade schon kamen, Stellung zu nehmen. Elena Bryan ist ein Profi im Handelsgeschäft. Sie ist seit ein paar Jahren in Brüssel an der amerikanischen Vertretung dort für Handelsfragen zuständig, begleitet, aber wenn ich das richtig sehe, schon seit vielen Jahren Handelsgespräche, hat schon Handelsabkommen in aller Welt verhandelt und auch an der berühmten Uruguay-Runde des GATT, die ja dann zur Gründung der WTO geführt hat, als Amerikanerin teilgenommen. Also Sie wissen, worum es geht und wie wichtig das Thema für Sie ist. Bitte schön, Sie haben das Wort.
Thank you very much, and thank you for listening to me in English. At one point, I will admit, I lived in Munich for a month some years ago when I was a student. So I understand a bit of the German, but it would be very short and frustrating experience for the audience if I tried to speak. So thank you very much for the comments of the Commissioner and Dr. Merck. We too think that TTIP is a very important undertaking. In the United States, we don't like to start trade agreements that we don't think we can finish. We spent a lot of time, the US and EU together, in the space between the challenge by President Obama and Presidents Van Rompuy and Barroso to their trade ministers to see what might be possible, and the announcement that we would begin negotiations. We spent a great deal of time together assessing whether the conditions were here to achieve the kind of agreement that both sides wanted. Our trade investment relationship is enormous. We have the biggest two-way relationship in the world, 2 billion euro worth of goods and services cross the water every day. We are significantly invested in one another. Our investment relationship is $4 trillion. And that's very much a two-way relationship. When this agreement is done, and I believe that we will achieve an agreement, a good agreement, it will be not only the biggest of its kind, but really the first of any size, where the two partners sitting across the table are equal partners. This is very much a two-way discussion with two partners who have well-developed legal and regulatory systems, and active stakeholders, and by stakeholders I mean anyone on both sides of the water. We started this agreement with the same objective, a shared objective, which continues to this day. We're looking for a high-standard, rules-based agreement that brings benefits and opportunities to both sides and can be politically supported and sustained on both sides. The only kind of agreement that will work for either of us or both of us is an agreement that's well-balanced. Somebody said to me, "Are you looking for the perfect agreement?" And I said, well, that's an interesting concept, but I think when you have two partners, you can't really have a perfect agreement, because what's perfect to one may not be perfect to the other. So we need to find the right place that works for both of us. We are indeed looking to eliminate tariffs and, where possible, non-tariff barriers in the trade between us. We're looking for a high-standard, rules-based investment agreement between the US and EU. We are looking to see where our regulatory systems can work better together. I often use autos as an example, but I won't repeat the example that the commissioner gave. But we have high standards on both sides of the water. Sometimes they're different. Oftentimes we get to the same place and we get there differently. Sometimes we have divergences in regulations, not because particular decisions were taken on either side of the water to meet a standard, but because our regulators went different ways and didn't compare notes well enough as the regulations developed. So we have many situations where we regulate to the same objective and we get there very differently. And those divergences make our companies less competitive, because it means they're repeating processes, they're getting double certifications. And one of the realities of this agreement is not that it's primarily about big business. Big business tend to have lots of resources and lots of lawyers and people who can chase governments around and figure out what's going on. Small and medium-sized enterprises, which I know are the bulk of the economy in Europe, are also the bulk of the economy in the United States. They are the jobs generators. And our economies need jobs and growth. Economies that are growing produce jobs. Small businesses may not be direct exporters. Sometimes they are. But they are the companies that produce inputs to someone else who produces inputs to someone else. And they have a vital role in the global value chain. The other thing I should say is that in the regulatory area, not only are we talking about particular regulatory issues, including a number that were identified to us in a joint public outreach that we did about 18 months ago. We asked people on both sides of the water, on either side of the water, to identify regulatory challenges we might address. Not only to identify the problem, but to also propose a solution. And where possible, for those entities to work across the water with a joint proposal. We did specify that indicating you shouldn't be regulated was probably not going to be a successful avenue. We got tremendous input, all of which is public, and we're now our regulators are working together on a number of the sectors that were identified. I'm a trade negotiator, I don't make regulation. Regulators make regulations. So the regulators are discussing. They're discussing auto safety. They're talking about chemicals and pharmaceuticals and medical devices and cosmetics and textiles and electrical goods, to see if there is space in any of those areas where we can improve the regulatory climate and eliminate, where possible, unnecessary divergences. We're also talking about horizontal issues. What does that mean in the regulatory side? It means, is there enough transparency in your system of rulemaking? We have a very specific system on our side of the water that requires agencies that are proposing regulations to publish them for public comment and to then be accountable for the comments they received when the final regulation is published. That system works very nicely for us. The EU has a different system. We would like there to be more transparency in the EU system in a way that fits in that system. We're also talking about things like conformity assessment, which is a very wonky thing if it doesn't work in your business sphere. But essentially, to sell a good in either market, you need to have a certificate from an entity in that market that says your product meets the standard. That's a burdensome process. It's an expensive process. And right now you have to do it twice, once in the EU and once in the US. Big companies, yes, it's a hassle, it's doable. If you're a small guy though, that is a significant barrier to selling your product in both markets. So we're discussing with the Commission ways that we might provide that an entity on either side of the water could certify for both markets. Half the burden, half the cost. We're also talking about a variety of issues that are not a problem in our trade, but of interest to both of us. For example, we have shared challenges in combating illegal logging in other parts of the world, in stopping illegal trafficking of wildlife. The idea is if we can work together, we can have principles that would enable us to better respond to those challenges. Let me make, I think, two other very important points. There is a myth that this is an agreement that will undermine regulation. Public health, safety, environmental protection, consumer rights, labor rights, and I'm sure there are others that I'm forgetting. And that is not the case on either side of the water. Our legislators, our governments, our people expect the high standards that we have on both sides of the water. In many cases, there was extensive discussion before particular decisions were taken. This is not about the right to regulate. I guarantee you the United States will not give up its right to regulate appropriately in our market, just as we don't expect the EU to give up its right to regulate appropriately. The question is, can we find some space on some issues where we can make the situation work better? President, I can say this, and I can say this. Commissioner de Gucht says it, Commissioner Ettinger said it. But for me, it was very gratifying to have President Obama come to Brussels a month ago, and he was asked a question by the press. And he said, and it was not a scripted answer, it was his own answer, he said, I have spent my life advocating and protecting the environment and labor and other things. And he said, and I'm not going to I won't sign a trade agreement that compromises any of those things. Quite practically, we need to find an agreement that works for both sides. One of the reasons that we've decided to embark on this agreement is because our leaders decided we would be better off together than apart. If we're spending time fighting each other on these things, then we waste valuable resources that could be used together to ensure that we can maintain these high standards that we've established. One final point. The best rules that come from government are the ones that have stakeholder input. We recognize that. We both recognize that, and we have done our utmost to up the outreach that we're doing on this agreement. I'm always interested in Brussels when someone says, you need more transparency, and then the next breath is, but there's more transparency in this negotiation than we've ever seen in a trade agreement. The US and the EU take this seriously, the importance of reaching out to our stakeholders, understanding their views and concerns, and ensuring that we have input. We have tried to be innovative in our approach. Next week, I will be in Washington for the 5th round of negotiations. One of the things that we've done together at each round is we've stopped the negotiations for half a day. We bring all the negotiators into the same place, and we invite anyone who wants to come meet them, to discuss their issue, to make a presentation on their interests, to come. The only restrictions that we've had on participation is we've limited the number of people that can come from a single entity, so that we don't end up with 5 people from one entity crowding out the range. We typically have about 400 people come, and we have robust discussion. And this has been useful for all of us. There is, one other piece I should say is TTIP is a trade agreement. It's a trade and investment agreement. It's not an agreement that is going to undermine the existing regulatory processes on both sides of the water. Indeed, when we make regulation in the United States, we have a set legal procedure that we must follow, and that will continue when TTIP is done. TTIP is not going to replace our regulatory process any more than we expect TTIP to replace the EU regulatory process. TTIP is not, another myth is that TTIP will require the EU to change its treaties. We haven't asked that any more than we expect that we will change the US Constitution as a result of TTIP. We have active processes, legal and legislative, on both sides of the water, and our job as negotiators is to find an agreement that works for both sides. Thank you.
Elena, vielen Dank.